Good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, and I'm hoping this finds you well. And welcome back to all my regular viewers, and a great shout out to any newcomers this evening. Please sit down, grab yourself a cup of tea or a beverage of your choice, and we are going to talk about the Yellow Vest protests and President Emmanuel Macron, and the fact that France is sinking into chaos as we speak. Now, the Yellow Vest protests have entered a staggering 38th week. These protests have been going on every weekend to protest the rising cost of living, the gentrification of the city, the lack of good jobs, and the seemingly staggering impediments which have been put upon the working class and the middle class in France. And what amazes me about this is the absolute staggering inability of people like President Macron and his wife to get what is going on. And so here we see on Bastille Day, and of course we will remember that Bastille Day is to celebrate the storming of the Bastille, which is when the beheadings began in France during the French Revolution as a response to food shortages and basically a lack of care or concern by the kings and noblemen and women of the day to the plight of the poor people. And of course, as we saw, the reaction was swift and brutal. And yet here we have on Bastille Day Macron parading around in a jeep in front of all of the forces of the army and showing off some guy with a rifle on a jet pad. And now, where have we seen generals and politicians parading around showing off the might and the prowess of the armed forces like a proper little dictator? And of course, it was very interesting that as Macron went down the Champs-Élysées, there were cries for him to resign and boos, and of course Macron is actually kind of frightened of going out in public now because of the vilification from the general public. And then of course there is the article about Brigitte Macron and just the dress that she was wearing. I mean, it really just absolutely shows a lack of care and concern for what is really going on. So instead of Macron worrying about the riots on the streets, and of course now we have the Black Vest protests have started up, and these are immigrants mostly from North Africa, and they're demanding that they should be recognized and given places to live. So you can just see that this is going to be a clash. You know, to have this kind of behavior going on within your own country by your own citizens is so absolutely dangerous. And of course, as I've mentioned before, there are ethnic no-go zones where the police basically do not enter. Only the army can go in there because the police are not armed well enough to be able to deal with what they might find. And all of these ethnic enclaves are basically almost a state to themselves within the country of France. And on top of all this public unrest, coupled with infrastructure collapse, same as everywhere else in the world, France's infrastructure is now coming to the end of its useful life, and that is going to be a huge economic burden on a country that is already laden with debt. Okay, so this is just adding to the pressure on the whole financial system of France, the social system of France. And you know, here we have a guy parading around in a jeep, pretending that climate change is the biggest issue on his agenda, and acting like a pompous idiot. And anyways, it's just absolutely amazing to me that these people are just blissfully unaware. They are so lacking in introspection and self-consciousness. The hubris and the arrogance is just amazing to see. And of course it will be their undoing. They are completely blind to what is going on out there. They live in such a tight bubble. And I heard a great saying the other day, and it was that you can paper over a lie, but you cannot paper over the consequences of that lie. And now we've had 30 to 40 years of this lunacy, this poor management. And if anybody thinks that we are managing this world well, please leave a message in the comments for me, because I think that we have been resting on the laurels of the work of our forefathers, and nobody has given any consideration to the replacement, to the upkeep of our infrastructure, which basically keeps our economies going. You ignore your infrastructure and you're going to drone everything in. We're all going to fly around. That's how it's going to work? No. The infrastructure, we are still a long way away from needing wells and septic tanks and sewage treatment plants and pipes under the ground carrying water. And all that needs maintenance. And without maintenance, it just breaks down. Anyway, I've got a couple of articles here that I'd like to go through with you, so let's pop over to those and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. From the Gatestone Institute, France slowly sinking into chaos. President Macron never says he's sorry for those who have lost an eye or a hand from extreme police brutality. Instead, he asked the French Parliament to pass a law that almost completely abolishes the right to protest and the presumption of innocence, and that allows the arrest of anyone, anywhere, even without a cause. The law was passed. In June, the French Parliament passed another law severely punishing anyone who says or writes something that might contain hate speech. The law is so vague that an American legal scholar, Jonathan Turley, felt compelled to react. France, he wrote, has now become one of the biggest international threats to freedom of speech. The main concern of Macron and the French government seems not to be the risk of riots, the public's discontent and the disappearance of Christianity, the disastrous economic situation or Islamization and its consequences. Instead, it's climate change. The West no longer knows what it is, because it does not know and does not want to know what shaped it, what constituted it, what it was and what it is. This self-asphyxiation leads naturally to a decadence that opens the way to new barbaric civilizations. Cardinal Robert Serra, the evening comes already, the light darkens. Paris, Champs-Élysées, July 14th, Bastille Day. Just before the military parade begins, President Emmanuel Macron comes down the avenue in an official car to greet the crowd. Thousands of people gathered along the avenue shout, "Macron resign," boo and hurl insults. At the end of the parade, a few dozen people release yellow balloons into the sky and distribute leaflets saying, "The yellow vests are not dead." The police disperse them quickly and firmly. Moments later, hundreds of Antifa anarchists arrive, throw security barriers on the roadway to erect barricades, start fires, and smash the storefronts of several shops. The police have a rough time mastering the situation, but early in the evening, after a few hours, they restore the calm. A few hours later, thousands of young Arabs from the suburbs gather near the Arc de Triomphe. They have apparently come to celebrate in their own way the victory of an Algerian soccer team. More storefronts are smashed, more shops looted. Algerian flags are everywhere. Slogans are belted out. "Long live Algeria," "France is ours," "Death to France." Signs bearing street names are replaced by signs bearing the name Abd el-Qaeda, the religious and military leader who fought against the French army at the time of colonization of Algeria. The police limit themselves to stemming the violence in the hope it will not spread. Around midnight, 3 leaders of the Yellow Vest movement come out of a police station and tell a TV reporter that they were arrested early that morning and imprisoned for the rest of the day. Their lawyer states that they did nothing wrong and were just preventatively arrested. He emphasizes that a law passed in February 2019 allows the French police to arrest any person suspected of going to a demonstration. No authorization from a judge is necessary and no appeal is possible. On July 12, 2 days before Bastille Day, several hundred self-declared African illegal migrants entered the Pantheon, the monument that houses the graves of heroes who played major roles in the history of France. There, the migrants announced the birth of the Black Vest movement. They demand the regularization of all illegal immigrants on French territory and free housing for each of them. The police show up but decline to intervene. Most of the demonstrators leave peacefully. A few who insult the police are arrested. France today is a country adrift. Unrest and lawlessness continue to gain ground. Disorder has become part of daily life. Polls show that a large majority reject President Macron. They seem to hate his arrogance and be inclined not to forgive him. They seem to resent his contempt for the poor and the way he crushed the Yellow Vest movement, and for his not having paid even the slightest attention to the protesters' smallest demands, such as the right to hold a citizens' referendum like those in Switzerland. Macron can no longer go anywhere in public without risking displays of anger. The French police appear ferocious when dealing with peaceful protesters, but barely able to prevent groups such as Antifa from causing violence. Therefore now at the end of each demonstration, Antifa show up. The French police seem particularly cautious when having to deal with young Arabs and illegal immigrants. The police have been given orders. They know that young Arabs and illegal migrants could create large-scale riots. 3 months ago in Grenoble, the police were pursuing some young Arabs on a stolen motorcycle who were accused of theft. While fleeing, they had an accident. 5 days of mayhem began. Macron looks like an authoritarian leader when he faces the disgruntled poor. He never says he's sorry for those who have lost an eye or a hand or suffered irreversible brain damage from extreme police brutality. Macron does not appear authoritarian, however, with violent anarchists. When facing young Arabs and illegal migrants, he looks positively weak. He knows what the former Interior Minister Gerard Collomb said in November 2018 while resigning from government. Communities in France are engaging in conflict with one another more and more, and I see it becoming more violent. Today we live side by side. I fear that tomorrow it will be face to face. Macron also knows what former President François Hollande said after serving his term as president. France is on the verge of partition. Macron knows that the partition of France already exists. Most Arabs and Africans live in no-go zones, apart from the rest of the population, where they accept the presence of non-Arabs and non-Africans less and less. They do not define themselves as French except when they say that France will belong to them. Reports show that most seem filled with a deep rejection of France and Western civilization. An increasing number seem to place their religion above their citizenship, and many seem radicalized and ready to fight. Macron apparently sees that the discontent that gave birth to the Yellow Vest movement is still there. He appears to think that repression will be enough to prevent any further uprising, and so does nothing to remedy the causes of the discontent. The Yellow Vest movement was born of a revolt against exorbitantly high taxes on fuel and harsh government measures against cars and motorists. These measures included reduced speed limits, 50 miles per hour on most highways, and more speed detection cameras, a sharp rise in the penalties on tickets, as well as complex and expensive annual motor vehicle controls. French taxes on fuels recently rose again and are now the highest in Europe, 70% of the price paid at the pump. Other measures against the use of automobiles and motorists still in force are especially painful for the poor. They were already chased from the suburbs by intolerant newcomers and now have to live and drive even farther from where they work. Macron has made no decision to remedy the disastrous economic situation in France. When he was elected, taxes, duties and social charges represented almost 50% of GDP. Government spending represented 57% of GDP, the highest among developed countries, and the ratio of national debt to GDP was almost 100%. Taxes, duties, social charges and government spending remain at the same level now as when Macron came in. The debt to GDP ratio is 100% and growing. The French economy is not creating jobs, and poverty remains extremely high. 14% of the population earn less than €855 or $950 a month. Macron pays no attention to the growing cultural disaster also seizing the country. The educational system is crumbling. An increasing percentage of students graduate from high school without knowing how to write a sentence free of errors that make incomprehensible anything they write. Christianity is disappearing. Most non-Muslim French no longer define themselves as Christians. The fire that ravaged the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris was officially an accident, but it was only one of the many Christian religious buildings in the country that were recently destroyed. Every week churches are vandalized to the general indifference of the public. In just the first half of 2019, 22 churches burnt down. The main concern of Macron and the French government seems not to be the risk of riots, the public's discontent, the disappearance of Christianity, the disastrous economic situation, or Islamization and its consequences. Instead, it is climate change, although the amount of France's carbon dioxide emissions is infinitesimal, less than 1% of the global total. Combating human-induced climate change appears Macron's absolute priority. And here we are from News Press Live, Yellow Vest Week 38 of Paris demonstrations. You know, I really had to search around. It is getting harder and harder to find any information about the Yellow Vest protests. Yellow Vests are out in force in Paris, France for week 38 of protests against President Macron and his political cronies, demonstrating against the elite who only look after the elite while the poor get poorer. Yellow Vest protests for the 38th straight week in Paris. According to official numbers, over 23,000 took to the streets last weekend across the country. And here we are from CGTN. Macron showcases European military cooperation on National Day. There we go. A futuristic highlight of the parade came when French inventor and entrepreneur Frankie Zapata showed off his flyboard soaring above the Champs-Élysées and the assembled leaders. The army is transforming, it is modernizing for our soldiers, our sovereignty and our independence, Macron told France 2 television. So there you go, crowd control on a hoverpad. And from the Express, Brigitte Macron, French First Lady, wears daring statement dress to Bastille Day 2019. Brigitte Macron, 66, is the French First Lady and married to President Emmanuel Macron. Today marks Bastille Day 2019, the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille on 14th July 1789 during the French Revolution. Brigitte opted for a stylish yet edgy outfit as she attended the military parade. And there we go, we have the full description. On her feet, Brigitte wore high pointed white heels with silver caps further setting off her tan. To match the silver in her shoes, the First Lady held a petite silver clutch in her hand. A beaded bracelet could be seen on her right wrist, as well as a ring on each hand. Her blonde bobbed hair was kept loose in a stylish blow-dry around her face. Brigitte kept her makeup natural for the event, letting her statement dress do the talking. And I don't know about you, but what is this going on her face? Is this like some kind of big rash breaking out on her face? I mean, goodness gracious. Anyway, this is the heady stuff that is worrying our national newspapers. So what I'd really like to say in closing, and I'll be quick about this because I know this is quite a long video, it is absolutely startling to me that we still listen to these people who have put themselves in charge. The longer this goes on, the worse it will be, because this is of course why the protests are happening. It's because more and more people are realizing that we are being mismanaged at a terrible, terrible level. And the amazing thing is, that this planet could be a paradise. A little bit better management, there are enough resources to go around. It is just greed and plain stupidity that is preventing that. Climate change, I believe, I'm not saying climate change is a non-issue, but I don't think there's anything we can do about the climate right now. This is like having, a 20 million ton tanker, trying to turn it. This is not going to happen overnight. What's done is done. I think that we need to start dealing with the problems on the ground and get those taken care of. To have climate change is one thing, but to have climate change, rotten infrastructure and public unrest is a completely different kettle of fish altogether. That is incalculably more dangerous a situation to be living in. So I would be taking care of those basics first and trying to iron out that stuff. But as I say, these people are locked up in their bubble. They don't want to see what is going on, so they pretend. And so what we have to do, we, the people, have to do is to learn to look at their actions. Don't listen to their words. Their words are polished and as smooth as silk. Okay? If you listen to the words, you are going to fall for the same old trick. But just look at how they behave. Look at how they behave. Look at how they've managed the world. They have literally managed to keep us so out of the management of the big picture that, one of the upsides of that is we know who to blame. And it is this group of globalists. They're the ones that have caused all of the problems. And we need to start thinking our way out of that. And that is going through ourselves. We have to start depending on ourselves, communicating with each other, and resolving issues at a local level. And quite literally stop trusting these people. How many times, how many elections do we have to go through? How many broken promises do we have to endure before we realize that these people they are the biggest hindrance in the way of progress? They are not an assistance at all. They bleed money from us and they hinder all progress. It's a very sad situation, really. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we will talk very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.